Okay, thanks. Evening all. I thought about this following on from a couple of OO badge claim flights that I got involved in the past year, and it seemed to me that generally claimants could be making a better chance of a successful claim if with a better understanding of the rules involved. So basically, this talk is not about how to fly the task. It's all about having flown the successful task, how you actually abide by the rules set by the BGA and the FAI so that you can make a successful claim. Oh, dear me. Right, the things which I'd like to cover is to talk about not busting airspace, because clearly this applies to every single flight you do. And a simple statement, any infringement will invalidate your flight. And then moving on, have you pre-declared your flight if that's necessary for the kind of claim you're making? Have you made a valid start and finish? Have you gone far enough? Have you rounded all your turn points satisfactorily? And are you using the correct type of logger? Badge flights require an IGC approved logger. That could either be a flight recorder or a position recorder. We'll get a bit more into the detail of those as we go on. Ladder flights, either on the SGC ladder or the BGA ladder, you can use any logger. It does not have to be IGC approved. So i.e. if you run a Kobo running XC SOAR, then that is perfectly satisfactory for either of the two ladders. Making a declaration is required most of the time. This can either be paper written. If you just bear with me a second, I'm just going to minimize the pictures of all your happy smiling faces in the corner so I can see the whole of my screen. That's it. So declarations can be either paper written or recorded in the flight or position recorder as appropriate to each particular badge claim. All our club gliders have got an IGC FLARM fitted. I think virtually all the private gliders at SGC also have FLARM fitted. They may or may not be IGC FLARM. Declarations direct to a FLARM require the writing of a new config file each time and inputting it into your FLARM. That's not a very user-friendly way of doing things. Some private gliders will have other instruments linked to their FLARM that can actually be used to enter the declarations on. Really, if you're flying using a club glider, to enter either a new config file or to download your trace immediately after landing is not very practical. Someone else may want to be using the glider after you've landed. Therefore, we would highly recommend that you purchase either your own flight recorder or your own position recorder. I'll keep remembering this. Right, the big one is not busting airspace. Aviation uses barometric altitude. That is based upon a standard atmosphere, i.e., as you know, surface pressure 1013.2, dropping at approximately 1 millibar per 30 feet as you ascend, and a surface temperature of 15 degrees, dropping at 2 degrees C per 1,000 foot. A flight recorder will record both barometric and GPS altitude. The barometric data in it is your basic primary data and is used as your first source to verify the flight. The BGA approved position recorder, i.e. the FR300, only records GPS data, what you might call absolute altitude. And there are differences between using the two of those. Errors can occur. Basically, the first one is if it's a non-standard atmosphere, which occurs most of the time. If you look at the chart on the screen, in the middle there, in the green, is what happens at a standard atmosphere day. The red is on a hot day and the blue is on a cold day. And you can see, for instance, that where it's 3,000 feet on a standard day, on a hot day when it's at 35 degrees C on the ground, that is actually 3,200 feet. On a cold day, your 3,000 foot reading on your altimeter will actually be 2,770 feet. So basically, on a cold day, your barometric altimeter, that's the instrument you can see when you're flying, will overread. And you need to be aware of airspace restrictions below you, or in fact, the ground. On a very hot day, your barometric altimeter will underread, and you'll actually be higher than what your altimeter is telling you. So this is where it becomes a difficulty if you are using just a position recorder that only records GPS height to validate your flight. There will be a difference between what the instrument is telling you and what you can see during your flight. You can also get friction lag in your altimeter. I'm sure we all remember the early days of doing our circuit flying, and the instructor in the back seat says, just gently tap the panel alongside the altimeter, and lo and behold, the needle instantly drops. How accurate is your altimeter? At its annual testing, it will be past satisfactory if it's within plus or minus 2 millibars, that's 60 feet. If you're approaching the airspace ceiling in a strong thermal, which you notice on the altimeter, and you decide to take appropriate action, it will actually take you time to stop your rate of climb and start to descend. There could very well be differences between your visual barometric altimeter and your hidden flight recorder barometric sensor. I have seen quite a few barogram traces from some of my flights and other people's flights where the GPS altitude has been greater than 150 feet higher than the barometric height. Therefore, it's always important to fly with a good safety margin, at least 200 to 300 feet, especially if you're relying on a position recorder. Think about it, guys. Just busting airspace by 50 feet will invalidate your flight, but it actually translates to very little practical extra distance that you could have achieved. It's just not worth taking the chance. So moving on to the kind of flights we can claim. We start with our club ladder. According to the rules for this coming year, a valid start is required unless you're going from the winch. That means you must pass through a 1 kilometer wide start line. That start line can either be SE2, STA, which is junction 14 on the M6, or the new turn point, which Peter's very kindly just established for us, of Seaford West, which is Ranton Abbey Tower, which is about 2.5 kilometers from SE2. No declaration is required for the club ladder. You can include up to 4 turn points, but no turn point must be greater than 50 kilometers from SE2. The only exception to this is if you are on an actual silver distance claim flight. And a finish anywhere on the airfield is satisfactory. Sorry, I should have said at the start that if there are any OOs listening to this, or indeed Peter or Chris Fox, and I make an error on anything I say on either the ladders or the code interpretation, please speak up. Moving on to the BGA ladder, you're strongly encouraged to enter all your flights on here. Basically, it proves we're using the airspace and is very valuable to people like Chris Fox in their discussions with the CAA. If you've pre-declared your flight, you get more points, but it's just an honesty tick box. If you claim a flight which you've not done, you're only kidding yourself, really. If you provide a logger trace, you also get more points. You don't have to display your flight in the daily scores list. You can go into an area of the ladder just to have your flight recorded as an airspace record. The BGA ladder has a 10-kilometer start and finish line, so it's actually an easy way to get into successful cross-country flights, I would suggest. More detailed information for this, you can look it up on the presentation that Chris Fox did for us last year. Just a point to bear in mind is that if you're using our lakes as your turn points, then you'd need to register them. And finally on that, Peter Gill has just informed me this afternoon that the club standard tasks, which is 2 100K, 2 200Ks and 2 300K flights, which are stored on the BGA ladder, have just been updated to start and finish from either Seifert West or the Stafford turn point.
Is it worth mentioning that if you do a club task, it counts as a declared task?
Yes. But Peter, we correct me, might be missing something here. We're only doing them on the SGC ladder, aren't we? In that sense.
Yeah, but if you do one of our club tasks on the BGA national ladder.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I'm with you. Yes, yeah, apologies. I missed
then
that.
If you do one of those 6 tasks, you don't have to declare it, but it is a declared task.
Yes. You're quite right. Thank you for reminding me on that. Right. Moving on to flights which are claimable either with the BGA or the FAI. There's nothing mandatory in you following this path in the future, but it is a very good way of being able to demonstrate to yourself and maybe to others how you are developing your experience as a glider pilot. I mean, it could be of value if you go and fly at some other places. As I understand it, places like my mind's going blank here. Flying in North Wales at Denbigh, they normally want pilots to have got their silver badge if they're going to fly solo there. So, starting with the BGA 100K diplomas, there are 2 parts to this. These are not FAI standard flights, they have been developed by the BGA as being a stepping stone between the FAI silver flight of 50K and the FFAI gold flight of 300K. So these are 100 kilometer flights. They must be declared, but as they're not FAI, then the BGA badge officer will accept a paper declaration. But he does say that he would think it was good practice to do a logger declaration so that you get used to it when you move on to the longer flights on the FAI system. It's defined as a closed circuit flight. What this means is you've got to cross the start line, you've got to cross the finish line, and both must be crossed in the direction of the task flight. I've got some diagrams at the end of this to show you on that. We have a cipher.
Sorry, Chris here. What do you mean by a logger declaration?
You make the declaration of your flight on your logger.
So is that like planning in a, I don't know, I've got a movie map or something like that, declaring that task on your device?
Yes, as long as it is an IGC approved logger.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Right. We have a ciphered site rule of not crossing the active airfield below 2,000 feet. So this can be a problem if you're returning from the south, unless you take appropriate action. Hence, we have developed the alternatives of starting and finishing at Stafford and Seaford West. It must be an IGC approved logger, either a flight recorder or a position recorder. If you have been doing some BGA ladder flights and you've set up your instrument to show the appropriate starts and finish lines of 10 kilometers on that, don't forget you will need to restart that. You will need to reset it to a 1 kilometer long start and finish line. Right, now we are in the realms of the FAI, i.e. the international standard flights, starting with FAI Silver. These flights will require OO approval. Declarations are not required. This is a BGA relaxation because the assumption is that the distance is going to be in a straight line. You need on the day duty instructor approval through the flight. For the silver distance, you've got to cover a minimum of 50 kilometers from release and the takeoff point to either a landing or a fix from your trace recording. There is a 1% loss of height rule applies, which is measured from release. Right? That's if you're using a flight recorder. If you're using a position recorder, these are not deemed to be as accurate by the FAI, and therefore there is a further 100-meter penalty if you're using it. So as a very quick example, if you actually only achieved 50K on your flight, then your maximum loss of height permitted would be 1,640 feet less the 328 feet extra margin for using a position recorder, which gives you quite a low start height. If you're starting from aerotow, then do a tight turn immediately after the aerotow release. If the OO cannot, when he checks your trace, cannot establish where you started the flight, then your flight will not be validated. On landing, you need to get a signed certificate. And the flight must be done without assistance from another pilot. So in other words, the way I interpret this is that two of you could not jointly fly next to each other, talking to each other on the radio, helping each other in that way. But that does not mean that if during your flight you happen to see another glider circling, then by all means, if you're looking for a thermal, go and join him. Silver height is a height gain of 1,000 meters. Now that is measured from any low point during your flight to any later high point. It is not from the release height. Again, there will be a 100-meter height requirement if you're using a position recorder, i.e. your height gain must be 1,100 meters. And the flight recorder must be within the validation period of 5 years, or retested within 2 months of the flight, or it will be treated as a position recorder with that 100-meter penalty. Your silver duration, that can be verified either by logger trace or by what's called OO continual observation of takeoff and landing. Just referring to the daily log at a later date is not satisfactory. According to the BGA, if you're not using a logger trace, then you need to make a declaration. Just as a general note on these flights, any flight recorder that is out of calibration for distance and duration can be used without getting it recalibrated, because it's only being used to verify flight continuity, not accuracy of height. Moving on to the FAI Gold, again, OO approval is required. Gold distance 300 kilometers. This must be IGC flight recorder or position recorder pre-declared. The flight can be a straight line, an out and return, a triangle, or a 3-turn point flight. The start can be from release or any declared point or start line to any type of finish, i.e. the landing, a landing, or an in-flight fix. There will be deductions for loss of height and cylinder turn points. So be careful that you're not just planning a flight that only just exceeds the 300K and then falls foul of the measurement being short because of your loss of height, or the fact that you've turned cylinder turn points, which will reduce the actual distance flown. If the loss of height is greater than 1,000 meters or 900 meters if using a position recorder, then there's a different calculation for calculating the permitted loss of height. Gold duration, 5 hours. You'll be glad to know that your silver duration qualified you also for gold duration. You don't need to sit with your legs crossed, keeping that bladder tightly closed again. Gold height. It's measured from a low point to a subsequent high point, the same as the silver. In fact, all the things are the same as the silver height. It does not have to be declared. This is a BGA relaxation. strictly speaking, according to the code, it should be pre-declared. Moving on to the heady height of diamonds. Again, OO approval. Now, this is a direct quote I got just recently from the BGA badge officer. He will not accept position recorder traces for diamond legs because of their limited IGC approval. However, if it's too much trouble to declare on an installed flight recorder, i.e. like a FLARM, which you've got at the back of your instrument panel, then he will accept a task declaration from a position recorder recording the same flight. Obviously, in that case, you've got to submit the traces from both the position recorder and the flight recorder. And the position recorder must be an IGC approved one. Diamond goal is a 300K closed circuit flight. It must be pre-declared, i.e. and it's closed flight, so you must cross the start and finish line. That's the 1 kilometer wide. And of course, there are deductions for loss of height and cylinder turn points. There's also diamond distance, which is a 500 kilometer flight. Must be pre-flight declared. It can be a straight line, out and return, triangle, 3 turn point. And just like the goal distance, the start can be release or any declared point or start line to any type of finish. Again, you get the deductions for loss of height. Diamond height, 3,000 meters. Again, a BGA relaxation, a declaration is not required. The BGA takes the view that things like the silver distance and duration flights and these height flights are quite often just done as the day unfolds. It turns out to be a better day than you expected, and you end up being able to meet one of the standards. Something that's well worth remembering, is that for the BGA 100K diploma, silver, gold, or diamond legs, any of them, any number of the legs can be claimed from a single flight. We're not talking about necessarily an individual flight for each individual leg, i.e. you don't necessarily have to do 3 flights for the gold and 3 flights for the silver and so on. So when you're planning to do these tasks, if you bear that in mind, it can be quite easy in the earliest days to do both your silver distance flight as well as the BGA 100K diploma flight. Obviously, as long as the first leg on your 100K diploma is greater than 50K. Right, OO responsibilities and actions. He is basically the BGA or FAI field representative, i.e. he's there to ensure that the flight is controlled in accordance with the code rules. Pre-flight, the OO should assist the pilot in making the declaration if one is required. He has to verify the logger, i.e. the type and serial number, and the pilot in the glider. If a portable logger is being used, then the OO must seal that in a glider. The way I read that is, if you're, say, using the BGA approved position recorder, you can't just hang it loosely around your neck, because that doesn't necessarily guarantee to the OO, who may very well not be there when you actually take off with it hanging around your neck, that it accompanied you on that flight. the OO must at least supervise the downloading of the flight and verify that any seal on any portable equipment is unbroken. What is not acceptable is for the pilot to come up to an OO later holding an SD card or a USB stick in his hand and say, I've done this flight, Joe, I want you to approve it. That is not satisfactory. It does not need to be the same OO for all aspects of the flight, i.e. it can be a different OO. Let's talk about the 5-hour duration flight is a good example of this. It does not need to be the same OO who observes the correct procedures on takeoff and at the landing. You can find a different OO to cover the landing and the downloading of the file. Strictly speaking, the OO is not responsible for checking all aspects of the trace. There are some aspects on the forms which he has to sign his name to, which will require him to look at parts of the trace, but not necessarily all aspects of the trace. That's the responsibility of the BGA badge claims officer. But he can save you pounds, so he can be your friend. Because there's a BGA charge for each claim you make, which as it sounds at the present time is £26 a time. So if you don't want to waste £26 by submitting a claim which is clearly going to fail, make sure you talk to your OO. And finally, the OO is responsible for ensuring that all information that's required on the claim form has been filled in. And basically, the OO should retain the original downloaded copy of the trace, just in case there are any problems downstream which require another copy of the trace. So finally, some start line examples. You look at the diagram there. Pilot A, he was towed down track and releases. He can only claim release distance. He can only claim silver distance from the release point. Pilot B releases down track, but goes back behind the start line, but doesn't actually cross it when heading out on course. Any closed circuit flight, basically his task is failed unless it is a pure straight distance or a free distance flight, which most of them are not. Pilot C releases, crosses the start line, climbs, and with the extra height goes back and recrosses the start line. You can claim any task completed, and you can use the most favorable crossing as the start time and height for the loss of height calculation. Finish line examples. Pilot A crosses the finish line correctly. The point he crosses the line is his final position and height for any distance and height calculations involved. Pilot B passes outside the finish line, thermals up and crosses the line in the wrong direction. The declared task is not complete because he's not crossed the finish line in the direction of the flight, which is a clear code requirement. But you can claim a fixed finish where a fixed finish is allowed for the flight. Pilot C lands straight in on the airfield without crossing the line. A goal task is not completed, but a claimed distance flight where the fixed finish is allowed is satisfactory. An example of this would be, say you're doing an out and return or a triangle, both for your gold 300k and your diamond goal flight. So as long as your landing on the airfield was in excess of 300 kilometers, you could still claim your gold distance flight, but because you didn't cross the finish line in the correct manner, you cannot claim your diamond gold flight. And finally, turn points. Pilot A only just enters the cylinder. Flight is valid, but he gets a 1 kilometer distance penalty for every turn point that he passes through in that manner. Pilot B logs a point in the cylinder and the sector behind the turn point. That's satisfactory, and there's no distance penalty. Pilot C makes a wide sweep around the turn point. You're free to go as far as necessary. That's a situation which could be advantage if you were combining a silver distance flight with the 100, with say the 100k diploma flight. If your turn point for your 100k diploma point was only just 50k away from your airfield and release point, then by going a distance behind that turn point, you could guarantee that you will meet the satisfactory distance for your silver distance, as well as obviously continuing the flight and completing the 100k. And that is about all I've got to say on the matter. Any questions?
Derek, if I declare a task on my UDI and it's an IGC UDI,
Yeah.
does that have to have anything done by the official observer?
What do you mean by done by the official observer?
Well, you said before that the FR type flight recorder, you have to seal it in some way, so you can't just have it around your neck. But an UDI similarly could just be moved from one aircraft to another.
I must admit, I'm not that familiar with the more sophisticated instruments that double up. Presumably, the UDI does the UDI link to the FLARM and get the actual trace out of the FLARM?
No, it's because it's IGC. You can download the IGC file. But it's the fact that it's portable. You can. It's like a mobile phone. You can move it around. I'm just wondering how you'd seal something like that.
It would have to be sealed in the aircraft.
Chris, I think the simple thing is the official observer has to satisfy himself that that was the logger that was carried on that flight.
Yes. Yeah.
So just be logging this
stacked in the centre section out of reach. That would be one thing. Or if it wasn't possible to change it, or possibly simply that you're a trustworthy fellow and you wouldn't dream of switching it around. But basically, the official observer simply signs to say that they're satisfied that the logging was correct.
Yeah, I suppose it's what it's trying to do is stop somebody putting a device like that in John McLaughlin's aircraft and just claiming whatever he's done on the day.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, as an official observer, I can't imagine John accepting that. You'd have to sneak it into the bottom of the engine compartment when he wasn't looking.
A simple way around this is if somebody checks I'm talking about the UDI now, if you check the serial number is in there and it's the same serial number when it gets back, that is probably a good way of doing it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, which would say that, you know, when you've landed, your first task should be to find an OO and get him to observe and record the serial number of the UDIT in your glider that you are using to take the logger trace off. And
Right.
that it is the same that was recorded by the OO before you take off.
Right. So you don't actually need to seal it in the traditional sense. You just log the fact that it's the same serial number at the start.
All I can say is, according to the code, it says it will be sealed. I can remember the days when we used to have the old steam-driven paragraphs. They used to have to go in the glider out of reach, and you used to have to put a sticky piece of paper with his signature across them.
I could see it with one of the FR ones. I could see if you put it in a bag or something like that and wrapped it up and signed your name across the tape or something like that. But I can't see how you would do that with an UDI other than just recording the serial number.
One issue to think about.
Why couldn't you just put a sticky piece of paper across the corner of the UDI and onto your instrument panel, and the OO signs that? Could be done.
Because, well, in my case, the only way I can carry my UDI is with a suction mount on the windscreen, on the screen, on the canopy, and that could be moved. You know, if we're talking about people trying to book the system, that could be moved from one aircraft to another. So I'm not really sure how that would work.
Well, we'd also be checking the takeoff time against the club log.
Yeah.
Which would be one, you know, if that time, your time coincided with the takeoff time for your aircraft, then it's reasonably clear that that device was being carried at that time.
Yeah.
One thing you might want to think about is if you don't make it back to the airfield, you know, doing an open task, it's a good idea to have an OO in your retrieve crew.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, because obviously, if it's several hours later when you get back, there may be issues.
One thing for OOs,
if you land at another site, get an OO there to sign the landing certificate.
Yeah, I mean the forms do permit the landing side of it to be signed by a non-OO, because it says that if you he must sign his name and address, but clearly an OO is preferable, which just gives me the opportunity, as Peter's saying there quite sensibly, of if you can take an OO on a land out with you and you still have done enough to make a claim, then it makes sense to take an OO with you. We don't have a great number of OOs in the club. Hence, for those who did read the last newsletter, there was a request by me for suitable club members to consider becoming OOs. I stand back and await all your nominations.
Jeff Lyons here. I am an OO.
Who's speaking?
Jeff Lyons.
Oh, hi, Jeff.
Hello. Yes, I am an OO. But one thing regarding flight recorders, and you talk about sealing them and checking who's who and who's what. It's highly possible these days that you might be flying, and arguably sensibly, with more than one flight recorder to ensure that you know, if one goes down, the other keeps going. But in terms of making a claim, you can only have one of those which actually has the task which you're going to fly, because it would be deemed as unfair otherwise that you take off and you've got two separate tasks, and you elect to, you know, change your mind going around, which is against the ideals of the FAI and
Mm.
FAA. So just, as OOs, we need to be wary of that when sort of reviewing what is presented to us, or indeed if we have the opportunity at the beginning to actually ensure that what is installed is in fact appropriate.
Can I just ask a question? In the world that we are as glider pilots doing something for fun and a hobby, it seems to me as though there's a huge amount of incredible amount of detail to stop people from cheating. But it just surprises me that something that we all do for fun and not for financial gain is being designed, because clearly at some point in time there was an awful lot of glider pilots that were determined to cheat the system, if you like. It seems a bit over the top to me for something that we're all doing for a bit of fun.
It all goes back to about 1976, when somebody called Mike Field first of all gained the UK altitude record at about 38,000 feet, and a few months later claimed a world altitude record of 48,000 feet over the south of England, which was thought to be unlikely. And a subsequent analysis of the old mechanical logger showed that he'd actually started the descent. He finished the descent before he started it, because he hadn't taken into account the angle of the instrument. But that was a very well reported claim. That and ever since then, because up to that point anyone would accept anything. After that, we tightened up. So you're absolutely right. 99.9% of glider pilots wouldn't dream of doing it, but one did, and we're stuck with it ever since.
And unfortunately, I think that the FAI Sporting Code has been written because of the minority, and I do have to say, I don't find the Sporting Code a very well written document, but I think it's almost written by lawyers and not by practical glider pilots.
Yeah, so the complexity of these flight recorders is something which, there are possibilities of getting called out, and that being the case, bloody good idea to practice going through the procedures on a day when you're not actually going to make a claim, but it becomes second nature to you, such that you complete the flight and you're confident that what you actually do when you come to submit it actually works. And good reason otherwise to be putting flights on whichever ladders. There's another one which hasn't been mentioned, which is used popularly throughout the world, which is called the OLC, which is less prescriptive compared with the BGA ladder, where it's been mentioned that you get extra points if you in fact complete the task which you've said you'd do, rather than just gone off and had a jolly good flight kind of thing. But that's the way they do it in the rest of the world. But good to have your flights out there, seen by others, good for comparison, and it's a record for yourself for how your flight went, which you can easily look back on.
Yes, exactly. Just one other point just comes to mind. Where an OO is involved, please, what I'm trying to do is get an updated list of OOs listed on the clubhouse wall, so that any potential claimants can access them easily and conveniently. And also, the more people that we have on that list, the better chance you will have of getting a good response from an OO, who could, if you think about it, could very well be trying to rig his own glider for a jolly flighter around the countryside.
Yeah, just a point to Andrew's point about why we do it. Presumably to progress in some areas of gliding, in being an instructor or for insurance and things, having a sort of a silver distance badge or a silver accreditation makes a difference to the price of your insurance, or whether you can progress onto some of the, or fly at Denby or whatever. So is that why we give so much attention to the details, so that you are a competent pilot or whatever to be able to progress.
Yes, I think that is a very valid point you make there, Andrew. You know, there are some cases where having some of these badges is mandatory if you're going to do certain things in the gliding field, like be an instructor and so forth. Yeah. So you certainly wouldn't want, an instructor who is the kind of person who has cheated on getting these qualifications. Doesn't make sense, does it?
Yeah.
So Jeff, if you let me have your OO number, I'll be more than happy to add you to the list that's going up on the wall soon.
I'll send it to you via WhatsApp or something.
Thanks, Jeff.
Tomorrow. Yeah.
Much appreciated. Any more questions? Or is everyone just numb from the from the rules?
Well, for me, Derek, my target this year is to get my silver. So I will be in touch when I'm starting to think as though I'm in a position where I'm somewhere close, getting ready to prep and doing a bit of practice of making sure I've got everything in order, you know, as we said, not on the day that you're planning to do it. So thank you very much
hopefully this talk this evening will help you be successful on the rules side, and I'm sure that some of the talks we've given in the past and looking at the title of it, I think the 2 further talks for this winter should also be of great assistance in helping people to make a successful flight and claim.
Yeah.
So the talk from Mike Fox and Graham's which are coming up.
That's right. Which leads me nicely. Thank you so much, Derek. So we have got the next talk. Hopefully, I will make sure I'm on time. Massive apologies to everyone again this evening for the late start of the talk. But the next talk is on Monday evening coming with Mike Fox, which is how to tackle your first soaring attempts and how to thermal and achieve soaring flights with confidence. So that's Monday evening coming. So what I'm going to do is send out the invite and put the link in the WhatsApp this evening. So that's done. So we can all get it in our diaries. 7:30 on Monday evening. And I'd just like to say a massive thank you to Derek for taking the time to put together a fantastic presentation and talk. Really great for everyone to understand and so important as we all progress in gliding and what have you. And probably for those who are more experienced members, a good recap and reminder on the way to do things correctly, etc. So thank you very much, Derek.
No, thank you all for joining me.
Cheers. Thanks, Derek.
Thanks, Derek. Good night, all.
Thank you, Derek.
Thank you.
Cheers, Derek.
Good night, everyone. Thanks, Derek.